It's your last chance if anybody has a weather-related joke that they want to share. Okay. If not, I do want to honor all of your time and get started because we do have a great amount of good information that we want to share with you today. Just want to let you know that this is our first HomeNE webinar for 2019. I don't know about you, but I kind of missed not getting together in December. But good day and welcome to all of you. My name is Lori Ferguson, and I am your tour guide for this version and this edition of the 2019 January HomeNE webinar. It's our very first of this new year. So today, as of 11 o'clock, we're just going to share a few things. We had 70 people, as Sherry mentioned earlier, registered for this January webinar, and 17 people are joining us for the first time ever on the HomeNE journey. So for those of you who are joining us for the first time, a huge welcome and thanks for taking time out of your day. We were doing our practice session earlier, and 86 different communities across the state of Nebraska have had representation in the HomeNE. So thank you for that. You're making this network grow statewide. So today we get to hear from Lynn Cohote of the Department of Economic Development and Sarah Arnett on the topics of housing solutions, DED funding programs, and Wood River housing accomplishments. So our agenda for today, as I mentioned, Lynn and Sarah will be speaking. Once they are done speaking, we will open it up to questions for them. And as I've mentioned, use your chat box if you think of a question as they're speaking, but do hold your questions until they're done. And then we'll turn it over to the group for some discussion and final thoughts before we conclude. So at this point, I am going to turn it over to Sharon Heffley, the Executive Director of South Central Economic Development District.
All right, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our January edition of the HomeNE 2019 webinar series. I hate to admit I'm having a hard time when I have to write that 19. I think, is it 19 what? I'm not doing very well with that, but we're glad you're here. The HomeNE program is a learning network that's geared towards housing in rural communities. We provide face-to-face and online opportunities to foster interaction, engagement, and skill building for local leaders and conveners. It is modeled after a similar program in South Dakota and was established in 2017. And like the stats show you, we have monthly webinars and 2 gatherings a year. And if you're on your computer, you can see the home location of webinar series participants. And if you notice the stars are different sizes, it doesn't mean anything. So the South Central Economic Development District acts as the lead agent, and each HomeNE event is intended to empower you as the participant to immediately apply what you learn. Today, we'll hear from Lynn Cohote, DED Housing Program Manager, and Sarah Arnett, Wood River Vision 2020 Committee Member. So I'm excited to get this started. I think that there's a lot of interest, so we don't want to delay any further. So it's my pleasure to introduce to you Lynn Cohote. Lynn is the Housing Manager for the State of Nebraska Department of Economic Development, or DED as we refer to them. The department's housing team oversees multiple state and federally funded programs that support workforce and income-based housing projects across Nebraska. Lynn joined the DED team in 2009 and previously worked with the department's Neighborhood Stabilization Program and in the Business Development Division before joining the housing team in May of 2018. Lynn's previous professional experience includes a more rural setting, serving nearly 5 years as the Executive Director of Economic Development, Chamber of Commerce, and Convention and Visitors Bureau in Burwell, Nebraska. And prior to that, she worked for the West Central Nebraska Development District out of Ogallala. Lynn and her husband, John, live in Omaha and have a 3-year-old son. So welcome, Lynn. I'll turn it over to you. And if you haven't unmuted, you'll want to do that. We can't hear you, Lynn. I can see that you're not, I don't show you muted on mine. Sherry, do you?
I don't show, but I show that she's lost audio capabilities.
Lynn, do you want to call in?
I don't know.
Lynn, did you just rejoin us?
She's still working on it. I can see her.
Okay.
Hello.
There you go.
Hey there.
Yes.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
I don't know what happened. I'm so sorry. Am I there?
You are good. Lynn, go ahead. We've got your first slide up, so it is
Great.
yours to take.
Sorry about that. So, well, thank you for having me today. It's always a pleasure to be able to share what the resources our agency has and how we can help communities and nonprofit organizations. This is I'll have you switch to the next slide. Okay, so I always like to, when I start talking with the group, I always like to share this kind of quote that's on our website, and it says, "Living here is just as important as working here. That's why business isn't our only focus. When you get right down to it, the strength of our communities and the people living in them are Nebraska's foundation. It's where it all starts." And so I think when you hear our agency's name, the Department of Economic Development, we also think about, a lot of times think about businesses and jobs, but we have a whole division, our Housing and Community Development Division, that is focused on improving the quality of life of individuals within our state and their living environment. And so we on the housing team have 5 different resources and different housing programs that we manage and oversee to help do this, to help improve communities and to help improve the lives of those people that are living in the communities. The 5 programs that we oversee 2 state-funded programs and 3 federal resources. Our 2 state programs are the Rural Workforce Housing Fund and then the Nebraska Affordable Housing Trust Fund, and we'll go into a little more depth here in a moment on those. And then, as I said, we are tasked by the federal government, primarily HUD, to utilize community development block grant funds, home investment partnership funds, and then the National Housing Trust funds to invest those dollars into communities and nonprofits across the state. So we'll go into further detail on those here too. So to first talk about the Rural Workforce Housing Fund program, this program was one that came about in 2017 and was a one-time only program. We don't know how long, or if there'll be more funds allocated to the program. I think it really depends on how successful our current grantees are in implementing their programs. But the Rural Workforce Housing Program was created by LB 518 during the 2017 legislative session, and it moved $7 million of our funding from the Nebraska Affordable Housing Trust Fund into this one-time Rural Workforce Fund. And it really is focused on looking at how do we address workforce housing availability in rural Nebraska. Last spring, nonprofit organizations had the opportunity to submit applications for this fund. In the application process, they had to document a dollar for dollar match. So for every dollar they were asking from this fund, they had to provide a documentation of a dollar cash match for every dollar they were asking. Projects that nonprofits then are able to invest their dollars in include new housing construction projects, new rental housing projects, owner-occupied or rental housing projects, and then upper story housing projects within their communities. We received numerous applications last spring that our agency went through the process of reviewing and analyzing and trying to make the best decisions on where we should invest those dollars. And so that's $7 million was awarded out to 14 different nonprofit development organizations across the state. I have those organizations listed here, and I wanted to mention this program because South Central Development District is one of our awardees and is in the process of kind of developing their program and deciding how they're going to invest their funds. And so I encourage you to reach out to Sharon and her group if your community is in the region, to kind of identify how they intend to utilize their fund, what they're investing in, and how it might be beneficial to your community. If you're not in the region served by South Central Development District, we do have good representation across most of the state, organizations that are implementing rural workforce housing funds. And so feel free to reach out to any one of these organizations to kind of find out what they're doing and how their programs might be able to benefit your community. Our agency was able to make investments of about $160,000 to $850,000 into any one of these nonprofit organizations. So the award amount varied across the state and across our recipients. So just some ideas to kind of get you thinking about how nonprofits are investing these dollars. Schuyler is in the process of investing their dollars into the construction of 2 new townhomes. Columbus has already started to break ground on some new rental housing units in their community. Governor Ricketts was able to be at the groundbreaking out in North Platte, where they started some new construction of single-family housing in their community. Kearney is in the process of developing their plan, and they're looking at building new housing units, new single-family housing units. And then a couple months ago, I was out in Fremont, where we had a groundbreaking, and they're investing their funding into multifamily rental units within their community. And then if anybody follows the governor, they just did a Facebook Live earlier. It was at 1 o'clock today. They just did a ribbon cutting in Wakefield, where as a result of the Rural Workforce Housing Fund, they cut the ribbon on 1 new housing unit in a home ownership unit, thanks to the Wayne Community Housing Development Corporation's Rural Workforce Housing Fund. I think it's really important for our communities and our grantees to have success with the Rural Workforce Housing Fund, because it'll help show the legislature that this program is successful and show what it can be doing for our communities. So just kind of wanted to mention that program, although it's just kind of it was a one-time only funding source for us. The next state resource that our agency administers is the Nebraska Affordable Housing Trust Fund. Many of you have probably heard about the trust fund, heard it mentioned before. This is a state resource that was developed in 1996 with the intent of increasing the supply and improving the quality of affordable housing in Nebraska. This fund is, where the funding comes from is every real estate transaction within the state of Nebraska, we pay a doc stamp. So when you buy a house, you pay a doc stamp, and a portion of that doc stamp every month goes into the Nebraska Affordable Housing Trust Fund. Over the 22 years that the Nebraska Affordable Housing Trust Fund has been around, we've invested $138 million into housing projects across the state. That's been leveraged with over $365 million in other funds, and it's impacted over 5,600 housing units within our state. So it's had a great impact for many years, and we really want to keep this resource around for our communities so they can continue to improve housing stock across the state. Eligible applicants for this program include, I'm going to have you go back one slide. Eligible applicants for this program include government subdivisions, public housing authorities, community action agencies, community-based, neighborhood-based, or reservation-based nonprofit 501c3 or 501c4 organizations, or then any for-profit entity that's working in conjunction with one of these eligible organizations. Eligible housing activities that we typically fund through this program include homeowner rehabilitation, or oftentimes we hear it referred to as owner-occupied housing rehab projects. We invest in a lot of home buyer activities projects, so we help to subsidize the new construction of housing units and then provide down payment assistance and/or closing cost assistance when the home buyer purchases the house. We invest in a number of rental projects, both new construction rentals and then rental rehabs, and then also do a lot of capacity building and operating assistance for housing organizations. The next slide lists our 2018 recipients of Nebraska Affordable Housing Trust Funds. I thought this was just kind of a good example so you can see who's kind of applying for the funds and who we're supporting in their housing activities. In 2018, we funded 19 entities across the state, but with 27 different projects. So we may have had a few of these organizations with a couple different projects that they came in with. So we may have 2 or 3 contracts with some of these organizations. So the investment we made into these organizations in 2018 was anywhere from $40,000 to about $1.5 million. So, and then I thought I'd just kind of give you a glimpse. I talk about eligible activities, but what does that really mean, and what are communities doing with these funds? Here's just some examples of what some of our 2018 projects are doing and how we're investing our money. In the city of Atkinson, our money is helping with the new construction of 2 single-family housing rental units. In Bloomfield, we're helping finance the cost of 4 duplexes or 8 rental units within the community. Habitat for Humanity is working within the communities of Blair, Omaha, Tekamah, and Waterloo, and constructing new housing units for 19 homeowners. High Plains Community Development Corporation, another nonprofit organization that we invested in Northwest Nebraska, and they have a down payment and closing cost assistance program within the counties they serve. And so we're helping with the closing costs and down payment assistance of 18 households. NeighborWorks Lincoln in Lincoln is constructing new housing units, and we're investing in those and helping provide down payment assistance for those new home buyers. NeighborWorks Northeast Nebraska, which serves, of course, Northeast Nebraska, multiple counties in Northeast Nebraska, we're investing in their purchase, rehab, resale program. So they purchase a house, they rehab it, and then they sell it to an income qualified household. And then another example is our investment in Three Rivers Housing Development Corporation, where they're building 3 housing units in Tekamah, and we're helping finance the construction costs and with the down payment and closing cost assistance to get that home buyer into that house. As you've noticed in my examples under each one on the bulleted items, we show what income level of a household we're serving, or what income level households are eligible for the program. The Nebraska Affordable Housing Trust Fund is designed to serve households at or below 120% of the area median income. Oftentimes, people kind of get a little nervous when you start talking about income limits, but our Nebraska Affordable Housing Trust Fund is the most flexible program we have, and with the least restrictions on it. And so when we're talking about 120% of the area median income, for a family of a household of one in Valley County, I just pulled up income limits for one county in Nebraska. So in Valley County, for a household of one, the income limit would be at $57,000 approximately. For a household of two, it would be at $65,000. And for a household of four, it would be at $81,000. And so I mention that because those income limits are really supported by, if they're not lower income, they're really the working class within our communities. And so they are very doable and servable income limits. I think important thing to note about our trust fund, if you have a project or you're thinking about something, we have a team of 7 housing team members who are willing, interested, and really want to learn about what your thoughts are and what your application could potentially look like. And so at the end of my slides, there is a map, and so I'll encourage you to reach out to any one of your housing or any one of our housing team members or the regional rep within your area to kind of talk about your project and how it might fit into our funding program. But the applications for this program for our 2019 funding cycle should be up on our website by the end of this month. We do require a pre-application, which is really a one-page, tell us about your project, tell us what you're thinking, so we can have a good idea of what communities are thinking, what applications are coming in, and we can also kind of manage our workload and understand what we're going to have coming in and how much time we need to set aside for reviewing applications. So those pre-apps are going to be due February 28th, and then full apps for the trust fund are due April 30th this year. So those are the 2 state resources that we have and that we manage and oversee right now at the state. Then to kind of transition into the 3 federal funding sources that we oversee. The first one is the Community Development Block Grant. As I mentioned, we receive money from the federal government, from HUD, and we have to invest these dollars into communities across the state. Eligible applicants for our Community Development Block Grant funds are counties and municipalities across the state, as long as they're not entitlement communities. So entitlement communities in the state of Nebraska are Lincoln, Omaha, Bellevue, and Grand Island. So we don't invest our state dollars into those communities since they have their own allocation of funds. We invest our Community Development Block Grant funds in a variety of community development, public works projects, planning projects, and then housing projects. So in regard to housing, the primary use of Community Development Block Grant funds are for owner-occupied housing rehabilitation programs. And so a community applies to our agency for funding, and the community sets up their own owner-occupied housing rehab program once they're funded through us. They set up their program, and then individual homeowners apply to the community to do rehab to their house. They hire a contractor, and they do rehab to their house to bring that house up to safe, suitable standards within the community. Applications for this program are usually due in the fall time. Last year they were due at the first part of October, and we announced awards in December for this program. It is a little more, since it is a federal program, our income restrictions are a little more restrictive. And so just to give you an idea, in Valley County, a one-person household would be at the limit would be $38,000. A two-person household would be at $43,500, and a four-person household would be about $54,000. The second federal program we oversee is our Home Investment Partnership Fund. The HOME program provides a resource for affordable housing to lower-income households by strengthening the capacity of nonprofit housing providers and private housing developers in the state. Eligible applicants for our HOME program include local units of government, public housing agencies, nonprofit organizations, and then community housing development organizations. Eligible housing activities that we invest our home fund dollars into include home buyer activities. So again, supporting new construction with down payment assistance or doing some type of purchase, rehab, resale program. And then we also invest in a number of rental projects, whether that be new construction rental or rental rehab projects. And then we also utilize this program to help provide some operating assistance to our community housing development organizations. The next slide provides just kind of a picture of one of the housing units we invested in, I believe in Columbus. So you can kind of see the before and after in the impact the investment of these home funds really had on this household, and not only on the housing unit, but the families then that were able to move into the housing unit. The final program and final federal program that we oversee is the National Housing Trust Fund. This has been around now, I think we're about in our third year of funding through this program, and it is an affordable housing resource that's increasing and preserving decent, safe, and sanitary, affordable housing for extremely low income and very low income households, including the homeless families. Eligible applicants include nonprofits, 501c3 and 501c4 housing organizations, and public housing authority. We are eligible housing activities. We're doing acquisition and rehab of rental housing. We're doing some renovation of rental housing units, doing adaptive reuse of rental housing, and then operating costs and assistance reserves for those projects that we invest in. This program is much, as the definition shows, much lower income levels. We're looking at 30% of the area median income, and so it's not geared for the home ownership aspect. But if you have, we're working a lot with public housing authorities and doing a lot of rehab, and so if there's any projects out there that the housing authorities that are looking at some rehab needs and really serve the lowest of the low income levels, they're at that 30%. We would be interested in talking to them, hearing about their project, and seeing if it could be a potential candidate for the National Housing Trust Fund. My next slide just kind of shows some pictures. This is one of the projects we've invested in. It's in Norfolk. It's the Skyline Apartments, and I apologize, I can't tell you exactly how many units, but it's probably about 8-9 floors, and there's probably at least 10 to 12 units on every floor. And we have invested along with, there's some city funds in the project and some bank financing, and so we're investing in the rehab of this facility. And as you can see, it kind of looks like a nice 1960s, 1970s, maybe older building. Is that first picture, and then you can kind of see some of the interior pictures where those are just some of the common spaces, but it's really being modernized and a lot of energy efficiency items being taken care of through this renovation. So my next slide shows our team map. I don't know how clear that is on everybody's screen, but hopefully when you have access to the slides, it's a little clearer. We have 4 regional reps across the state who serve the regions. If you can, whichever region if you're in, please feel free to reach out to the appropriate regional rep to talk about your housing project, to learn more about our programs. Really talk to them about what your project is, and they can help guide you on which of our programs would be most beneficial to your community and to meet the needs of your project. Otherwise, that's the end of my presentation. I thank you for having me, and I hope my information was useful. And I apologize that you couldn't hear me at the beginning.
Thanks, Lynn. It was all good, and We've got a couple questions in the chat box already that we will run by for some answers from you at the end of the day. So thank you once again, Lynn. And now it's my pleasure to introduce to you Sarah Arnett. She is a volunteer member of the Wood River 2020 Vision 2020 Committee member, as well as the Compliance Officer for Heritage Bank. She was born and raised in Wood River and then returned about 24 years ago from the Twin Cities area to her hometown, and she's doing some good things there with many other volunteers. Just a personal note, I was brand new here at SCED 4 days into the job perhaps and got to go meet Sarah. So she was my very first community contact, and we talked about, of all things, housing programs that might be available to the city of Wood River. So with that, I will turn it over to Sarah.
Thanks, Lori. Well, thank you for having me today. It's a pleasure to be here, and I guess, you know, my role in this is to provide other communities a view of the owner-occupied rehab programs from the community side of the perspective. So next slide. My first piece of advice is, if you aren't already, get plugged into your economic development district. I have to give a huge shout out to South Central Economic Development between Lori and Sharon and Levi. They've been monumentally helpful to the community of Wood River as we tried to get plugged into various programs. And what you'll see today is that we started with owner-occupied rehab, and it has really been a catalyst for our community to dream bigger dreams and to accomplish new things. Next slide. So where we began was in late 2012. Our community decided we needed to be more intentional about the planning for the future of the community and what did we want that to look like. So we did some strategic visioning with large community groups, and out of that came this entity that is a nonprofit called Wood River Vision 2020 Inc. Next slide. And with help from SCED, they advised us that a good starting point would be to start with a community needs assessment survey. And that was super helpful. They helped us design the survey and determine what information we wanted to get. We delivered those door to door in English, and we also had a Spanish version as well, and had a real good participation rate. Next slide. What that told us was, as a community, what we needed was more housing, but we also needed to improve the quality of the housing that was already here, and then to work on some aesthetics and childcare. Those were the 4 big priorities from the fall of 2013. So when we were looking at doing an owner-occupied rehab program, one of our concerns as a committee was, well, we can make this application, but will anyone participate in it? Because there's no point in getting the money if you can't employ it readily in your community. So the first thing that we did prior to even considering doing a grant was to survey our community. So we sent out a survey brochure, and it went out with every utility statement. That's how we distributed that, so that we knew that every homeowner would get a copy of this survey. But what we were trying to ascertain from that survey process was, you know, first of all, does your home need repairs? Secondly, would they complete the paperwork to participate, because it is some work? And then thirdly, did they believe that they were income eligible to participate in the OOR program at 100% of area median income or less? So we were having to do some education and try and recruit potential applicants. And I believe we had 40-some responses. Is that right, Lori? Do you remember?
Sorry, I do not remember, to be honest with you, but it was a good turnout. Yes.
It was a really good turnout, and so we can attribute that. Next slide, Sherry. We can attribute that to a couple of incentives that we embedded into that process. I would encourage you to give people some reason to participate in this. We were also in the process of updating our housing study and comp plan with Hannah Keelan, if you'll go back one. And so Hannah Keelan wanted to use this owner-occupied rehab survey as part of the housing study, so they threw in the availability of a $50 gift card. So just random drawing of everyone that responded to the survey, they had a chance to win that. And then secondly, we gave priority to those survey respondents in the application process. So they would kind of get to the front of the line because they proactively participated in the survey. Next slide. So then Hannah Keelan used that, and you're going to see in my slides that across the bottom, usually in italics, I've listed some entities, and what I'm trying to show there is collaboration. These are all the organizations that partnered to getting this piece of work accomplished. So in that case, Wood River Vision took the lead, the city helped with financing, and we got a NIFA grant to do the housing study. Next slide. So one of the first things that I would encourage any community to do if they're thinking about doing an owner-occupied rehab program with grant funding is to figure out how you're going to raise the money for matching funds. Unless things have changed, it's a super competitive grant process. And for each category of the application, you get so many points, right? Well, you want to try and max out your points by gathering matching funds within your community. So, you know, look to your foundations and your businesses and maybe your city, depending on how progressive they are. And then to start thinking of ways that you can show in-kind contributions to your grant application as well. And I listed a few things that we did there. Next slide. Then for us, you know, we really were pretty inexperienced when it came to housing programs and what, you know, how to structure an owner-occupied rehab program. So as Sharon fondly says, do some R&D, rob and duplicate. But we asked around, you know, we find out what other communities have done, what worked well, what would they do differently, what did they learn, or, you know, are they still glad now, you know, 3, 5, 10 years down the road, are they still glad they structured it the way they did? Next slide. And here were some of the considerations that our Vision Housing Committee worked through and debated at length. When you do OOR, it can either be a forgivable grant or a repayable loan. So which fits better for your community? And if it's going to be a forgivable grant, how many years are you going to spread that forgiveness period over? We did 10 years. We forgive 10% of the project amount each year. Then who's going to serve as the housing administrator? In our case, we worked with SCED, and they subcontracted with a company in Hastings, Housing Development Corporation, who did all the, you know, application underwriting at the homeowner level, and then they inspected the house if the owner was eligible. They worked with the contractors. So there was not any need for someone at the city level to be in the weeds at that level because that was contracted out as part of the package. And then, you know, what are you trying to accomplish? Are there any priorities that you're trying to achieve in your ranking of the applications and so on? Then a twist to the OOR program is we included $25,000 in our application to go toward demolition of housing structures that were beyond repair. And we will be using that up. We're at the tail end of our 3-year grant period, and we will have used it all up on 3 properties. Next slide. So when you look at completing an OOR application, it's important to demonstrate need. And so when we did that survey, that really, I think, strengthened our application because we were able to show, okay, here I have my notes, 41 households affirmed that their home needs repair, and based on their own self-certification, they fall within the eligible income levels. And those are the income levels that Lynn was quoting before, based on, you know, how many people are in the household and stuff. So now that we're at the tail end of our project, you know, you can see our numbers here. When we started out, we thought we would be able to rehab 9 homes. What we ended up getting done is 13 homes. We had a total of 14 applications. One had to be denied because investing $25,000 in that house still wouldn't have brought it up to code. You know, so I was glad in hindsight that we started with a big pool of like 41 respondents, because some of those evaporate on you. And, you know, some really don't have low enough income. Their situation has changed. They've moved. Some just wouldn't do the paperwork. And then we did run into a couple people who didn't have homeowners insurance, either because their house wasn't insurable based on the condition, or they couldn't afford to keep homeowners insurance in place. And that was one of the rules of the program, from the OOR program, not something we decided. So in hindsight, I was glad we started with a big applicant pool. So think about that as you decide how much you want to request in your grant application. Next slide, please. The other thing that we tried to do in our application to set ourselves apart and really to bring our community together around this was to look for ways that we could collaborate to raise up housing in our community. So in our application, we showed collaboration from all of these different things. Like the fire department said, yeah, we'll go into any of these applicants' homes and inspect their smoke detectors, do safety checks, that sort of thing. We've run 3 years worth of paint-a-thons that involve the Ministerial Association and the Girl Scouts and Boy Scouts. The Community Foundation helped us with a landscaping project that also involved the high school FFA chapter, and the high school, middle school, high school offered to do some homeowner assistance. So we were trying to pull everyone together and set ourselves apart. Next slide. The other thing we did is we looked for ways to partner with the business community. Some of that came in the form of matching funds, but then you can see here there were several other ways that we worked with businesses to get them plugged into the program, and maybe it's a value added that we could offer to homeowners or ones who weren't selected or whatever. Next slide. Then I remember someone distinctly telling us when we were considering applying is that it was important to be able to show that if you got funded, you would have the capacity to complete the renovations. Because we all know, if you've ever done a home improvement project, it's hard to find contractors and get them there on a timely basis. So we reached out and got commitment letters up front from contractors in a variety of fields to show that we did have the capacity to complete these renovations if we were awarded. Next slide. And then, you know, it's important when you're writing one of these applications to toot your own community's horn. And, you know, these are some of the things that we did that I think in hindsight assisted our application. Of course, you never know what your rankings were exactly, but I think that was probably helpful. And then I'll certainly put a plug in for DED's Certified Leadership Community status. We've since gotten that, and that gets you bonus points in most of these grant applications. So if you haven't considered that program, I would encourage you to look into that a little bit further. Next slide. So once we were awarded the grant, then you know, we started, you know, reaching out to prospective applicants through a variety of methods, and tried to bring everyone together for a public meeting, because you have a lot of explaining to do about the program, particularly if it's, for us, it was the first time we'd done anything as a community housing wise. So that was important to pull people together and get the word out. Next slide. And here were some of the fears and concerns that we heard through those early stages. So from the perspective of the potential applicant, some people were afraid that the city could take their house away because we were going to file a mortgage on the house for the amount of the award that, you know, the rehab project. Well, the intention of that was not to take their house away. It was to secure the city's position so that they couldn't improve their house and turn around and sell it a year later and pocket the profit. We didn't want anybody to abuse the program. It's intended to be owner-occupied rehab for them to continue to use. So that was some misinformation. Confidentiality in any community, I think it's paramount that you can reassure people that their income and asset information is confidential. In our particular case, we structured it so that the application information went direct to Housing Development Corporation. They underwrote those applications. No one in our local community saw any of that. And I do think that that helped build faith in the program. And then particularly with older people there in number 3, you know, you don't know what your health is going to do, and you hope that you have another 10 years to stay in your home, but what if they get sick and need to move into assisted living or something? So, you know, helping them and their kids see that even if they don't stay in the home another 10 years for reasons beyond their control, then when the time comes to sell that house, they have a much more marketable home, and that they'll get a higher rate or higher price for that house. And in the meantime, we've improved the quality of life of the resident in that house. Then on the right side of your screen, I mentioned a few things that we heard from city residents, and I'm sure that first one wouldn't surprise anybody in rural Nebraska. Who's paying for this? Is this a taxpayer-funded deal? You know, so you have to assure them that, you know the matching funds were all provided by, foundations, businesses, whatever the case may be, and that this is a grant program. It's not coming from local taxpayers. And I think you have to help the community see that instead of perceiving a program like this as a free ride for someone, what we're really doing is elevating the quality of our housing stock as a community and extending the life of those homes. Pretty much everything that we renovated was older homes, and you know, if we hadn't intervened and done those renovations, that house was not going to be able to sustain a family for that many more years. But now we've improved the quality and extended the life of that house. Next slide. So here are some pictures of some of the things that we did along the way. Our paint-a-thons, we had the Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts clean up the yard first because you got to get all the debris away or all the vegetation away from the house. Next slide. Then we met with the contractors. I remember SCED and Housing Development Corporation, there are a lot of rules for those contractors that are going to participate in the OOR program. And it took personal outreach, sending them a letter, how they ignore that. So make sure that you stay in touch with your contractors. Next slide. Here's another before and after. This house benefited both from the paint-a-thon and the OOR grant. Next slide. And here's another. In that case, that's a family of 4, and there was a lot of energy efficiency improvements done with windows and siding, and it certainly improved the aesthetics. Next slide. Another twist, as I alluded to before in the collaboration discussion, was we worked with our local FFA chapter because one of the things that ag programs study is horticulture, and landscape design. So we presented them an opportunity to, would they like to work with homeowners to assess the current situation, whether it be plantings or drainage issues or whatever the case may be, and present a proposal to them of what they would recommend for landscaping improvements. And then if the homeowner liked their ideas, then the students were given permission to go in and make those landscaping improvements. And so here were some of the kids that work on one of the homes that accepted their offer. Next slide. So in the end, we've improved 13 homes. We've demolished 2. What you see here on the left is one of the ones that was demolished. And if I had a current picture, I'd show you that there's a house on that lot now that's almost done. And as it would always be in a community, that crappy looking house on the left was of course right on a busy highway, so it was really visible to anybody passing through our community. So getting rid of that, it was vacant, it was unlivable, it just needed to go away. That was a huge improvement. Next slide. And then as we're at the tail end of our program, we've got one last house that the city is trying to acquire the deed to, and to demolish that to use up the last of our funds. And I think it speaks for itself. Next slide. So one of Lori asked me, just to make sure and point out that activity breeds activity and success breeds success. So we did the owner-occupied rehab grant. We were awarded in 2015. And since that time, Wood River as a community has applied for and received a downtown revitalization grant, phase 1 grant funding. And recently we were awarded a CDBG grant to construct a child development center to solve a critical shortage of early childhood education and care in our community. So I would encourage you to, dream big and start out maybe with owner-occupied rehab, and I hope it works as well for you guys as it did for Wood River. And that's all I have.
Okay, thank you to Lynn and Sarah. There is one slide that remains. Sarah, are you making these things available or information available?
Yeah, I
I
forgot
believe
about
that's
Lori,
okay.
sorry. Yeah, so if your community is looking at doing OOR and you want to rob and duplicate any of our materials, you can just shoot me an email and I'm happy to attach those original files so you can take them and improve upon them to meet your community's needs.
Okay. Thank you so much. Once again, thanks to Lynn and Sarah for all the great information. We're going to open it up for some Q&A now for our speakers. There were a couple questions in the chat box, and I'll pose those first, but if you want to ask a question, just open up your microphone. We ask that you limit it to one question for either speaker, and then if you have additional questions, put those in the chat box and we'll monitor that. So CJ had a question for Lynn, and she asks, how is the current federal shutdown affecting CDBG funding and payments out to current grantees?
Can you hear me?
We can.
Oh, okay. Oh, good. Okay. I hope nothing happened in the meantime. So we have not had any significant impact on us with the shutdown. We don't have access to getting technical assistance through our HUD field rep, but we are continuing to process payments for our grantees. So for our grantees, there shouldn't be any concern at this time. But we hope the federal government opens up rather quickly, because we do have a number of documents and reports that have to be turned into the federal government, and we're still having to report and do everything that we need to get into them, regardless of them being shut down. But other than not having them there for technical assistance, no significant impact.
Okay, super. And then Jeff wanted to know, our grantees who have received either OOR owner-occupied rehab or purchase rehab resale funds having trouble finding qualified contractors. What are you hearing?
So it varies across the state. In the more rural areas, it does become a little more complicated. So I really liked a lot of Sarah's discussion about how they got contractors on board early on. Some of our organizations have developed very good relationships with contractors over the years, and so those organizations, you know, they have that pool of contractors that keeps coming back to them time and time again. So, but you know, the more rural we get, some of those, when the communities are doing first-time projects, it is a little more of a challenge. So that's why I think just taking into consideration, if you're thinking about doing some type of rehab projects, to get your contractors on board when you're starting to write your application, as Sarah had indicated.
Okay, perfect. And then we had a question for Sarah, and I think you touched on this, but please comment again. Along with the survey that you did, does Wood River have an updated comp plan, a housing study, and is Wood River a certified economic development community?
Yeah, so in order to do our OOR grant, we had to update our housing study and comp plan at that time, and that was all completed by Hannah Keelan and Associates. And we are a leadership certified community. We are not a certified economic development community yet, but boy,
Okay.
maybe after we get that child development center built, huh?
Okay, well, and I think we've got people on the call that can help you with that, Sarah, if you would like. So, and you received your leadership designation in 2016, is that correct?
That sounds right, Lori.
Okay, okay. So I did ask if anybody was thinking of submitting applications to the programs that Lynn has mentioned this afternoon, and I got one response that Benkelman, perhaps in conjunction with some other communities out in the southwestern part of the state, is looking at an application for the demonstration grant and a spring application. So, Lynn, we're trying to send some work your way. So,
we are always looking. We're wanting new applications, new creative, innovative ideas to come in. So please don't hesitate.
And what is the deadline for the demonstration grant program? Could you repeat
Yes.
that?
Yeah, so I really didn't touch on that. Just very briefly, actually last year in our 2018 funding cycle, we did not have enough applications come in for all the funding that we had available. And so we have about $3 million left over from last year. And so we're taking in not really applications, but what we're calling requests for proposals, or RFPs. And those are due, I believe it's February 13th. And so if a community, it's maximum 15 pages. And so we're really looking for new, innovative, unique ways to use the trust fund in housing related projects. So I'd encourage any community, nonprofit organization, housing authority, if you have an idea, to submit it. Our director's really looking for some new creative ideas.
Okay. Okay, thank you for touching on that. Are there any other questions for either of our speakers? If, did somebody have something that they wanted to share? Otherwise, I had a couple questions for our group today. If you would please share, what was one item that jumped out at you today during the conversation with Lynn and Sarah? And you can use your chat box or open your microphone. Or perhaps one item of interest to you today. Okay, Andy mentioned in the chat box he thought it was great how they sent out the pre-survey in Wood River through the utility bill and got contractors on board early. Great job. And then Sharon shared that new construction with the trust funds, collaboration in Wood River. So good stuff. So, okay. Would somebody like to share what is one step you might take today to begin implementing some of the things you heard about, whether it's a program that Lynn oversees or perhaps something that Wood River has done? Is anybody going to take a step? While you're thinking on that, let me just begin to wrap up. Feel free to send something through the chat box if something, oh, Raquel mentioned, and Megan, so let me back up here. Megan mentioned that she loved the community collaboration as well, and then also loved the paint-a-thon and landscape. She definitely would consider bringing that to their community. Raquel mentioned that she loves the idea that Wood River did with their FFA group. And Joanne mentioned the expand support letters in the grant application. So thanks for sharing, ladies. So perhaps some of you are still typing, but let me just wrap up our time together. We are in the process of planning our spring gathering. We've had 3 to date as part of the HomeNE Learning Network. And this year, or this spring, we will be holding a one-day gathering in Schuyler, Nebraska. So please make note of that and be watching for specific details in the coming weeks. I'm just going to back up. John has mentioned one thing that he liked. He's dreaming about the demonstration projects in north central Nebraska. And Nancy is possibly interested in submitting an application for homeless housing project since Scotts Bluff does not have an emergency shelter, and she's thinking of using the trust fund for that application. So good stuff. Keep sharing, and as I can, I will share that. On your screen right now is our next webinar is February 21st, and the topic will be Housing Development Requires Leadership. So how do we get there? Be thinking about that question. Our guest speakers next month will be Nicole Sedlacek from Nebraska Public Power District, as well as Sunny Corkle. She's with the KBR Leadership Academy, and for those of you who are not familiar with that group, it's a program that is committed to developing active and engaging leaders in the Tri-County region of Kippaha, Brown, and Rock counties in north central Nebraska. Northern Nebraska, excuse me, I cannot read my writing today. But so more good stuff is coming your way next month, and so we look forward to having both Nicole and Sunny with us, and as well all of you on February 21st. So with that, are there any other questions or comments that anybody wants to share? If not, I'm going to just say thank you again to all of you for joining us, and have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you on February 21st.